tonight. This meeting is about a proposed development at Sierra Point called the Towers Project. The site of this project is 2000 Sierra Point Parkway and 8000 Marina Boulevard, where the developer would like to add 2 additional life sciences buildings and a parking garage. With the existing buildings, this would create a life sciences campus. The city has determined that preparation of an EIR, also called an environmental impact report, will be required. Tonight is the first step in the EIR process. This meeting will assist the city in determining the scope and content of the EIR. We want to know what environmental issues you think should be studied in the EIR. Whatever opinions you might have about the project itself, please remember our focus tonight is only to identify potential environmental impact. The EIR will be prepared by a consultant hired by the city, ensuring that the environmental analysis is independent. Once the EIR is completed, you'll have further opportunities to express opinions about the EIR and the project itself, because public hearings will be scheduled at both Planning Commission and City Council meetings. Thank you for participating tonight and in the process going forward. I'll now turn things over to John Swiecki, our Community Development Director. He'll be joined with city staff and our EIR consultant, who will guide you through this meeting tonight.
Thank you, Mayor Mackin. I'm going to turn it over directly to Kelley Beggs, who's a contract planner for the City of Brisbane and is managing this particular project. Kelley, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, John. Good evening, everyone. I'm Kelley Beggs. I'm a principal contract planner for the City of Brisbane, and I'll be helping to process this application and to move the environmental review process forward. As the mayor kindly introduced, the purpose of tonight's meeting is really to collect public and agency comments on the scope of the EIR. There will be many more steps throughout this process where the public can provide comments and review the analysis. So this is really the kickoff to that process. And with that, I will turn it over to our environmental consultant, Teresa Wallace, who is a principal environmental planner with LSA.
All right, thank you, Kelley. I'm just going to share my screen here. All right, so thanks again. Again, we're LSA, the city's environmental consultant for review of the project. So this first slide just lists the topics that I will cover in my presentation tonight, including the purpose of the scoping session, an overview of the proposed project and the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, topics that will be addressed in the Comprehensive Environmental Impact Report, or EIR, that will be prepared to evaluate the environmental impacts of the project, and an overview of the environmental review process and schedule. After that, we'll move ahead with public comment. So the purpose of the scoping session tonight is to engage interested parties early on in the environmental review process and to get your thoughts on the topics that should be considered in the EIR. The merits of the project are not being considered tonight. Comments should focus on the range of environmental topics to be considered, any specific issues of concern related to environmental topics, the approach and methods used in the analysis, and potential mitigation measures or alternatives that you think should be considered. So first, a brief overview of the project itself. The site is located at 2000 Sierra Point Parkway and 8000 Marina Boulevard at the center of the Sierra Point Peninsula at the southern end of the city. The nearly 16-acre site consists of 2 office buildings, one 8 stories in height and the other 12 stories, that total about 427,000 square feet and are generally located on the southern half of the project site. A 3-story parking garage is located on the eastern portion of the site, and the rest of the site consists of surface parking and landscaping. So the proposed project would result in demolition of the existing parking garage and surface parking lots and construction of 4 new buildings that would integrate with the 2 existing office buildings to create a life sciences campus. The campus would ultimately consist of the 4 office and life sciences buildings, an amenity building, a parking garage, common and public outdoor recreational space, and associated circulation and infrastructure improvements. In total, the proposed project would result in approximately 850,000 square feet of new building construction and retention of 427,000 square feet of existing building space, for a total of about 1.2 million square feet of office and life sciences uses, and a total of about 3,850 parking spaces. Buildings on the site would range from 2 to 14 stories in height. We're currently working to define the project for CEQA purposes, and there may be some refinements made that will be reflected in the EIR if needed. I'd like to note that the environmental analysis must evaluate the impacts of the project as it is proposed in the project sponsor's application. So a little background on CEQA. CEQA requires lead agencies to approve projects, to identify agencies that approve projects, to identify environmental impacts associated with those projects, and then either avoid or mitigate those impacts. CEQA documents are prepared to inform decision makers so that they can look at the potential environmental impacts that are identified and make informed decisions about the project. Again, this means that the merits of the project are not considered in the CEQA process, and the environmental review does not include a recommendation as to whether or not the project should be approved. Based on preliminary review of the project application materials, the city has determined that an EIR will be prepared, and the purpose of scoping is to inform the EIR analysis. So this slide provides a basic overview of how projects are evaluated under CEQA. This process is used to evaluate each of the 20 or so topics required by the state CEQA guidelines. For most projects, including this one, the baseline conditions are generally those that exist around the time of the publication of the Notice of Preparation, or the NOP. And the NOP was published just a few weeks ago. So the baseline is essentially the conditions as they exist on the project site today in the spring of 2022. And that's what we're using to compare the effects of the proposed project to. The significance thresholds will be based on the CEQA guidelines, which are established by the state, as well as local and regional policies. The effects of the project will then be compared to the baseline conditions to determine potential impacts. Cumulative impacts will also be addressed. I'd like to point out that the focus of the analysis is on direct physical changes to the environment, and economic and social changes are not considered in a project level environmental review. So because of the location, size, and scale of the project, it was determined that a comprehensive EIR will be required, and it will look at the full range of topics required by CEQA, most of which are shown here. For the benefit of those that may be listening, these topics are aesthetics, air quality, cultural and tribal resources, biological resources, energy, geology and soils, greenhouse gas emissions, hazards and hazardous materials, hydrology and water quality, land use and planning, noise, population and housing, public services and recreation, transportation, and utilities and infrastructure. Additional topics include agricultural and mineral resources and wildfire. These topics will be addressed at an appropriate level of detail, but are expected to not require full evaluation like the other topic. At this point, our work is really just getting underway as we're coordinating closely with the city to fully and conservatively define the project for purposes of CEQA, and be sure that we have all of the necessary information that we need in order to conduct the analysis. So I'd like to just stress that this is early on in the process here, and we've not yet truly initiated the EIR analysis. Technical studies will be prepared for the topics of air quality, energy, geology and soils, greenhouse gas emissions, hazards, noise, transportation, and infrastructure, including water supply. Visual simulations that depict the before and after conditions of the project will also be prepared. All of these technical evaluations will inform the EIR analysis. So finally, the EIR is required to evaluate a reasonable range of alternatives. The alternatives should attain most of the basic objectives of the project, which will be defined as part of the project description, and should avoid or substantially lessen any significant effects of the project. The alternatives will be developed after the impacts of the project are identified and with input received during the NOP comment period. And no project alternative will be considered, which is required by CEQA. Other alternatives would depend on the potential impact of the project. And if any members of the public or other interested parties have ideas for potential alternatives that they would like to see analyzed, we would certainly welcome those. Moving on, this slide shows the opportunities for public comment on the EIR, including during public meetings and in writing. We're currently in that first teal diamond on the first row, the scoping of environmental issues. The remaining diamonds are future opportunities to comment, which will include at least 2 more public hearings, which I'll talk about in a minute. There may also be other opportunities that these are other future meetings to comment on the merits of the project. So this slide shows the overall schedule anticipated for the environmental review process. On February 28th, the city issued the NOP, notifying interested parties and responsible agencies that an EIR will be prepared. The standard 30-day comment period ends on Tuesday, March 29th. During this time, interested parties are encouraged to submit comments on the scope of the EIR in writing. Tonight, of course, is also your opportunity to provide verbal comments. Over the next several months, we will prepare the EIR, and the draft EIR is expected to be published sometime in the early fall of this year. After the EIR is published, there will be a 45-day public comment period. And during those 45 days, interested parties will have an opportunity to review the EIR and submit comments to the city. The city will hold a public hearing on the draft EIR during the 45-day comment period. And at that time, the public can also provide verbal or written comments. After the close of the comment period, we will then prepare written responses to each substantive comment received on the adequacy of the EIR analysis in what is called a response to comments document. The response to comments document will also include any revisions to the draft EIR, if any are necessary. Together, the draft EIR and the response to comments document will constitute the final EIR. The final EIR will be published and available for review a minimum of 10 days before any hearings are held. Once the final EIR is complete, the city will consider certification of the EIR, and after that, as a separate action, will consider approval of the project. The public may attend these hearings and provide comments on the final EIR. An EIR certification is currently anticipated by early next year. So that kind of concludes my overview of the CEQA process and the environmental review schedule. This slide shows the details of how you can access the webinar or call in to make comments. And we will keep it up throughout the public comment portion of the meeting. The call-in number for those who need it is 1-669-900-9128. And you will enter *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute yourself after you are called on by Kelley. And again, the purpose of this meeting is to engage the public early on in the environmental review process and to get your thoughts on the topics that should be evaluated in the EIR. Tonight is not about the size or the scale of the project, the proposed uses, the design, or any of the project elements or merits, as those items will be discussed at separate meetings. Our role again tonight is to listen to your concerns and ideas. We'll be taking detailed notes. There will be a transcript. But again, we encourage you to submit your comments in writing, again, prior to Tuesday, March 29th at 5 p.m. The information on this slide shows the contact information for the city, and we'll put this slide back up, I think, at the end of the comment period for those that need it. And this information can also be found on the city website and in the NOP. And so with that, I will hand it back to Kelley to facilitate public comment.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Teresa. So at this point, you are welcome to either raise your hand through the Zoom webinar or to call in and dial *9 and *6 to unmute. My colleague Jeremiah will be calling on folks in the order in which they raise their hands or call in to make their comments. So at this point, I don't think we see any raised hands or any calls, but we'll give folks a couple minutes to compose their thoughts.
So we have Nick.
Apologies for the background noise. Quick question. Was an environmental impact report submitted for 2000 Sierra Point and 8000 Marina Boulevard, the existing buildings, in the past, prior to their development? And then secondly, if there was there any hallmark issues that were identified or, concerns prior to the final EIR report?
I'll be glad to answer that. Again, thanks for the question, Nick. There was an EIR done for the redevelopment of Sierra Point overall, and that's EIR probably dates back to the mid 80s, 1980s. So certainly the requirements under CEQA would have been very different than they are today. And certainly, the idea that we wouldn't be in a position to rely on that 30-year-old or more 40-year-old environmental document. So we will be taking a fresh look at all the topics at hand. Certainly some of the same issues, like underlying conditions, like the fact being built on a landfill. Obviously, some of those underlying conditions are the same, and there'll be pre-existing technical work that can be presented by the applicant to support the work they're doing now. But we're generally looking at taking a fresh look at all those topics.
Great, thank you. That's helpful.
I'll just note that we're happy to hear more comments. Should we not hear anything by 7:30, I see someone else just raised their hands. We'll close at that time, but we'll keep it open as long as folks want to raise their hands and comment.
Kim, go ahead.
I just had a question. What exactly is the zoning amendment that's being proposed?
Or I can take that question.
Thanks.
So there are some existing guidelines that govern the height, the Sierra Point design guidelines in the area. And that does cap the height at 12 stories. So there is a zoning text amendment to increase the height of one of the buildings to 14 stories.
Go ahead, Nick.
Guys, one more quick question. Will the slide deck from this presentation and the full transcripts be available for me to review later on?
We can certainly post the slide deck on the project website. In terms of the full transcript, I think that you could probably request that from the city via an email. But I don't believe that that will be published on the website necessarily.
No problem. I think the slide deck is more than sufficient actually. So great. Thanks so much.
No problem at all. I'll just do a time check for everybody. It's 7:29. So we're gonna try to wrap this up in another minute. So if anybody would like to voice any last comments, now is your time. All right. In that case, seeing none, thank you so much to everyone for attending tonight. Maybe let's go back a slide. Thank you, Teresa. You still have many opportunities between now and March 29th before 5 o'clock to submit your comments in writing to me, either via mail or email using the contact information shown on this slide. And we will be on the lookout for any of those written comments. We'll also consider everything that was brought up tonight. So we really appreciate everyone for attending and hope everyone has a great night.
Recording stopped.